Now remember, when you get your clay out of here, don't get more than you need out because you want it to stay soft and plastic. You want it to be plastic. So I'm gonna get like a golf ball size piece out, about this big. I mean, it's really pretty small. So this is the size I want to start working with. And I'm gonna wrap up the rest of mine, wrap it back up really tight because I don't want any clay to get dried out. Now, if your clay is getting a little dry in your bag, you're feeling it, and you're thinking, this feels kind of hard. What you could do is just take a tablespoon of water and put some water in there to it and soften it up. Remember, water's not meant for smoothing, it's meant for rehydrating this clay. So I've got a ball of clay right here. It's about a golf ball size. It's kind of big. And I've got a couple of these pinch pots already that I started out with a pretty big pinch pot, but this probably would be my biggest amount of clay for my pinch pots. I wouldn't want to get more than this for a pinch pot. So because I want to make pinch pots that are all different sizes and they're gradual sizing from small to large, my next piece is going to be smaller than this, and then my next piece will be smaller than that, my next piece will be smaller than that, okay? So that's how that'll work. I want to take my thumb and I want to push it down to the bottom of the clay. And I want to feel the bottom here, and I want to feel how thick it is. I don't want to push my thumb through. I'm feeling how thick it is. I want it to be about as thick as the side of this ruler, this thickness right here. If I can get it that thick, that shows a lot of skill. So if I just this thick, maybe a little bit thicker than this, the ruler thickness. Okay, I don't want it like double that size, and I get some people that make their pinch pots really thick, and that shows a lack of time, effort, and skill. So please don't do that. Don't turn in stuff like that. Now, what I did was I went to the bottom and I put my thumb down there and got the right thickness. So I've got it in here, and I've got the thickness at the bottom, about the right thickness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start turning my pinch pot and start pinching a little bit higher on my clay. And I'm turning and pinching. And as I get it the right thickness, I pinch further up the pinch pot. At some point, I'm able to get 2 thumbs in here. Okay, I got big old fat thumbs, so it's kind of tough. If you have smaller thumbs, it might be easier. And you can pinch like this. Now, what can happen when you pinch this is it can get really wide. It can get really spread out. What you don't want it to do is spread out. You want these to be nice and tall because they have to fit together. Okay, so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch it and then push it together. Watch what I do with my hands. I pinch, push together. Pinch it and push it together. Pinch and push together. You see what I'm doing? I'm pinching and pushing it together. Pinch, push together. And that's how I make it tall. Now I can do it fast. You see how my hands come together as I pinch it? And that's how I make my pinch pot tall instead of wide. If I just pinch, it'll turn out really wide, and you'll know if you did it wrong, because instead of being tall, it's like super, like it's almost like a plate, and they look really silly that way, but that's what happens when you don't push together. So remember, I'm pinching and pushing together. Pinch, push together. Pinch, push together. See, I'm pushing my hands together each time. So I'm like pushing the clay together, okay? And I'm pinching and doing that. And as I go up, I have to kind of work my way higher and higher on the pinch pot, okay? And I also have to feel the pinch pot. I want to feel the same thickness. If I come in here and touch the inside of the pinch pot, if I don't feel the same thickness, if I feel an area is too thick, then I pinch it a little bit. And if it's too thin, I don't touch it. Or I try to kind of push some clay together, okay? We don't want to get it too thin where we break a hole in it, but we don't want some big thick areas. Okay, so some of you are bound to be getting what I'm getting here. My other clay the other day, I was getting it worse. I was getting big cracks here. And if you get big cracks here, what you could do is that means it's losing its plasticity, its moisture. You can add a little bit of water. So I could just take my finger on my water and just kind of put a little bit on these cracks. Now remember, I'm not trying to smooth it, I'm trying to rehydrate it. And I can take my blending tool if I need to, and I can try to blend these back together. Kind of blending the clay back together, getting it wet and then blending it back together. So you may have big gaps in yours. And if you have big gaps, it'll take a little bit more work. Today I had smaller gaps. And the reason why I had smaller gaps today and I had bigger ones last week is when I was showing 7th Hour how to do this, my clay was a little bit dry. So what did I do is I put 2 tablespoons of water in my bag. I didn't put a lot of water. I didn't put like a cup of water. I put 2 tablespoons of water in my bag and I closed it up. And when I came back today, you can see I don't have any big areas that look like it's too dry. It's because I hydrated it. I put some water in there. So sometimes I'll do that. If my clay is looking a little dry, I put some water in there and I let it sit in there. Now I wouldn't probably put water in with my project, but sometimes I put like a wet paper towel in with my project, not on my project, but in with my project, and that keeps it kind of wet and moist in there, keeps some moisture in there. So if you're losing moisture out of your bag, you know, it's moisture maybe from the paper towel and not from your clay. So you can see I've got a quite tall pinch pot here. And I can shape this later. I'm not worried about it now. Because it's so plastic and it's so bendable, I want it to get a little bit harder before I start shaping it. And to shape it, what I'll do is I will take my ruler and I will paddle it. That's how I shape it. And you'll notice as you paddle it, it also smooths it. Now if you paddle and you hit the edge here on there, you know, look what happens if I do that. I get these big marks on here. I don't want to do that. I want to keep the paddle nice and flat so that I'm not hitting the corners on there. I hit the corners on there, it's not going to look very good. And then when I get over here to the edges, sometimes I will do this. I'll just put my hand under there. I have to give it some support, because if I don't give it any support, it'll break. You know, I'll bust it in, you know, reshape it. But so I'm putting my hands in there and I'm supporting it and I'm paddling it. Now don't worry that the edges are a little bit crooked. We're not worried about that, because we can later, when this firms up some and gets more leather hard, we can just trim that right off and we can make it, or we could make it real wavy, you know, depending on what we want to do. Okay? So don't worry about that at this point. If you're starting to get cracks in there, like I got a crack right here, you can always take your tool, get a little water on there, try to blend it in there, and that might help some. Okay? It takes a little bit of patience sometimes to do this. Okay, and just blend it in there. Don't try to smooth it. Just try to blend it together with this. Remember, we're rehydrating, not smoothing. Okay, so what happens if we try to smooth with water is we bring out the grog in our clay, and we don't want to bring out the grog because that grog looks like sand, and it'll make our clay look rougher than it is. So that's why we do that. So I'm getting a little crack in here, and I could take a little bit of water and try to blend that together. Okay, so when I've got it as thin as I want it to go, and I got it the size I want it to be, and I got it the shape I want it to be, basically, we can reshape it some later. I've done a little paddling. I just have to let this sit and dry a little bit. Now, I don't want it as dry as my other ones, because those got a little bit too dry, and I put a wet paper towel on it, and I'm kind of rehydrating it now. But I'll see if I can carve this here. Like, I've got some bad edges here, and see, I could take my knife and try to carve this, and you have to be very careful, remember, with a knife. Don't do something silly and get yourself cut or stab yourself. Just be very careful, very careful. I've cut myself so many times, I can't even tell you how many times I've cut myself. And not always, like in pottery, not really, but in other things, working with tools and stuff, I've done that. And so I'm trying to cut it off, and look, I got a little bit bad edge there. So I may have to either cut that off, or I may have to fix it with a little bit of clay. The problem is right now, this clay here is leather hard, it's firming up, and if I put plastic clay on there right now, it will shrink at different rates, and it'll probably break apart. Okay, so also after I get this a little bit rehydrated, then I can go back and paddle it and smooth it. Okay, Also, I can come in here and kind of clean the edges a little bit. But this is too hard to work with. But remember, I told you when you carve, you want to do it when it's leather hard. And this is leather hard, but it's kind of like it's closer to bone dry than leather hard. So it definitely needs water. It needs to be rehydrated a bit. Now remember, don't put a whole bunch of water in with your project, because you could come back and that project is mush. Now look at these little pieces I've got here. Don't throw those away. Those are still good. We will put these back in our bag, put a little water on them, and we can make clay out of those again. So we don't throw this stuff away. So even little pieces like that, we'll go ahead and keep. Unless it's just like dust, we will keep it. Okay, so I've got one of these done, and I'm just going to let it sit out and harden up a little bit so that I can paddle it and I can smooth it and I can decide what I want to do with the texture on it. Okay, remember, to do it well, it has to be thin. If it's not this thin, then your grade will suffer a little bit. It has to have consistent thickness. If I feel in here and I feel that it's not consistently the same, then that shows me that you didn't put the time in this to do this right. To do a pinch pot right, I would say that most of the time my students will get 2 done in a class period. Okay, 2 of them done. If you're doing more than that, you probably are doing a bad job, and you're probably not going to get a very good grade. I mean, I could do all of them in a class period, but they wouldn't be very good, and I wouldn't get a very good grade, for that. So don't do that. You want to spend 2 of them per class period. So like 2 every 45 minutes is about the right pace. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit more clay out now because I got one done. And remember, I keep all my clay in my bag and I keep it wrapped up. We want to keep that nice and moist. And remember, if your clay is a little hard in your bag, a couple tablespoons of clay or water with your clay, and that's not with your projects, that's with your clay that you haven't used yet. Projects, you could put a wet paper towel on them or a wet paper towel in the bag, depending on how dry they are. But I've had some kids put too much wet water on those, come back the next day, and their stuff is like mush because it soaked up all that water and it collapsed. So you don't want to do that. Okay, so I've got another ball of clay here, and I'm going to roll it up, and I think hopefully this one is smaller than the last one. Now, some people try to make all their balls of clay first, and so they could see the size of the ball is smaller and smaller and smaller. They know their pinch pots are going to be different sizes. But when I've done that, my clay dries out. And if you did that, you'd have to really be careful to keep your clay all really moist. So this is a little bit smaller, but it probably is okay. So I can start again. I'm going to push down to the bottom, and I'm going to do this a little faster this time. And I'm looking for the right thickness on the bottom. Okay, I've got the right thickness, and I'm spinning, and I'm moving my fingers higher on the clay, and I'm pinching. And I want to continue to pinch and pinch and pinch and pinch and pinch and turn and pinch, keeping the clay the same thickness. If I get my both thumbs in there, I can pinch and push together. Pinch and push my hands together. So I'm pinching while I push my hands together. And I'm going to keep working up the clay. As I get the thickness I need, then I move on to a thicker area up higher on the clay. And I'm working my way towards the lip, towards the mouth of the clay. Okay, we talked about the lip being the outer edge. Remember that in our terms? So I'm going to continue to work up. So I want the walls all the same thickness. And I want them about as thick as this ruler here. A little bit thicker is fine, but about that thickness. If they're thicker than that, that shows me you haven't taken the time or put in the work to do a good job on those, and your grade will suffer. So the key to this is spending the time to do it right. If you take shortcuts, it's going to show. It's going to show in your work, and it's going to show in your grade. And believe me, I have graded literally thousands of these pinch pots. Thousands of them. Over 31 years, I've graded a lot of these. And so I can tell in an instant how much time has been put into the work. It doesn't take me just but a second to see that. Okay, So I've got a pinch pot, and you see I've got some cracks along the edges. So if I want, I can take my tool or my finger and get some water on this. Remember, we're not smoothing, we're rehydrating, and we're blending together these cracks. The reason why it cracks is it's losing moisture. The thinner the clay is, the faster it's going to lose that moisture. So we're making this super thin, so it's going to dry really fast. So I'm just kind of blending those together. Last time then I did this for the last class, like I said, the clay was really dry, and I kind of got my whole clay ball wet, and then I kind of worked it, and I worked the clay into it. It was a little slimy at first, but I worked the water into it, and I worked the clay, and I softened it up. And that's what you may have to do. You may have to soften it up. Okay, and I'm going to blend these. Again, I'm going rather fast, and I wouldn't suggest you go as fast as me. And when I'm in class, sometimes kids will have a hard time with this, and I'll go over and I'll fix up the pinch pots, and they're like, Mr. M, how'd you do that in like, 2 or 3 minutes? And it took me like 20 or 30 minutes, and mine was worse. And I said, because I've done like a couple thousand of these. After you do the first 1,000, you get pretty good at it. Okay? And so I'm going to continue doing this until I get it nice and thin. Remember, that shows your skill, how thin you can get it, and how even and consistent the walls are, the thickness is. Okay? So I've got that pretty good. I could go ahead and start paddling this if I wanted to, very gently. I usually like to get it a little bit drier before I'm paddling it, because it does a better job. But for now, I could very gently do that. If your clay is really wet, you may not be able to do this. And understanding the perfect stage to paddle and smooth is important. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to let this sit and dry. But you notice when I've got my pinch pots here, I've got two. There are two different sizes. The next one should be smaller, and the next one should be smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then when you get down to that little bitty one, it's really hard to do because you can't get your thumbs in there. Okay, that's all for today. I will see you guys next time.